Join us on the Masculinity podcast if you're a man and you're confused about what it means to be a man today. My name's Zac Fine and I'm here with Pablo Woolls-Blanco. He's a 20-year-old man who asks me questions and I do my best to answer them. I'm a 39-year-old man and I'm a therapist, specialising in men's issues.
Welcome to the Masculinity podcast. My name's Zac Fine. I'm here with Pablo Woolls-Blanco. I'm a therapist, and Pablo is a student in his second year of journalism studies at university. We've decided to do this podcast after a conversation we had, and what we want to do is cover the different bits of the masculinity crisis in a way that's clear enough, hopefully, and bite-sized enough, hopefully, to bring some value to young men out there like Pablo, who have a lot of questions but not a lot of answers and a lot of misinformation. So that's our intention. Pablo contacted me recently to interview me about my work. So I work with men and women, but I have a special interest in masculinity and men's issues. So I hope our conversations will maybe model what could be happening more. And I've got a fair bit of clinical experience working with men, so I know some of the issues pretty well. And Pablo, you've got your own perspective, so I think there's some value in the difference of our life stages. I'm 39. How old are you again?
I'm 20, turning 21 in a month.
Yeah. Great. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So, I mean, as Zac said, I'm Pablo Woolls-Blanco. I'm a student at Falmouth University. Really looking to get into sports journalism, but I am on a journalism and creative writing degree. And like Zac said, I contacted him about an interview really because I'm quite fascinated really about, well, sort of as we're calling it, like the modern masculinity crisis, right? And I think as we've seen really in the news and everything, this is a topic that's being hugely spoken about. So, when Zac came forward with the idea that we could have this sort of series of chats where we sort of try and cover all of these topics in chunks, in episodes that can hopefully give value to a lot of men like myself, then, that was an idea that appealed to me a lot. So, yeah, today we're sort of going to be starting with sort of an overview about what's happening to men, young men, why it's happened, what's being told, the mixed messages and everything that comes with it. But in future weeks, we're going to be delving into all sorts of topics such as, relationships or schools, or, are men still allowed to be men, and everything that comes with it. So hopefully it gives value to a lot of you. So, Zac, I suppose we'll get into it and sort of just kickstart, and then we can go from here and hopefully get some good conversation going. What do you think's happened to the modern male? What are we seeing now we're in 2023, but over the past few years that's made this such an important topic to talk about and such a crisis really for men? Let's put it straight.
Yeah. An anecdote is coming to my mind that might capture it. So my friend Joe Horton, who runs Guild of Dads, which is a sort of coaching membership thing for dads who are middle-aged dads who are kind of in malaise, that they're unhappy but they don't know why. He said he was in the headquarters of a big kind of construction firm the other day, and they had a library there with all sorts of books and information on minorities and women and equality, and it's probably something to do with the cultural shift that's now kind of entered into all walks of life. You know, it's in the education system, it's in politics, it's in corporate culture, and it's in families to some extent. And what he said was that there are all these books about how can we make things better for women, which is fine, but it was a very cold day, and there were men outside doing, working outside in the freezing weather, and there were no books about supporting and encouraging growth in men. And I think that maybe this is a good place to start, just by naming it as the empathy gap, because the empathy gap is real. I know it's real based on all the statistics. So if a man and a woman are found guilty of the same crime, the guidelines to the judges are to try and avoid sending a woman to jail, with a custodial sentence. So men are much, much more likely to get a custodial sentence, and they're much more likely to get a longer punishment or a more severe punishment than women. And this is just invisible, really, because it's not invisible in the statistics. There's so many places you can verify this, and it's not partisan information. It's in the ONS data. It's in the CDC data. It's everywhere. But the empathy gap basically is this way we all have, men included, of not being able to empathize with the suffering of men and boys. And there's a very interesting theory on why that is. So it's not necessarily a conspiracy, although there are radical feminist lobby groups who are quite effective, but they're having an impact on lobbying the Ministry of Justice to get, for example, to make it much harder for men to see their own children after family separation. So if we just begin with the premise that there is an empathy gap, so it's harder to care about men than it is to care about women. Everything makes sense from that point on. It's sort of a cascade effect, and all the statistics make sense. If we don't have something like the empathy gap as a concept, what it looks like is it's just a sort of discrimination. So I think using the empathy gap is a sort of compassionate human understanding of what's going on. But how do I fill out the picture? So so family separation. 90% of single parent families are the children are with the mother. So fatherlessness is a really big hallmark of this. The effects of fatherlessness have been well studied, and your life chances are much poorer if you don't have your father in your life. It's associated with less confidence. So if children grow up with a single father rather than a single mother, they actually end up more confident, the research shows. In boys, fatherlessness affects them in different ways, in slightly more severe ways, arguably. So in his book, The Boy Crisis, Warren Farrell and John Gray spoke about the actual physiological impact of fatherlessness on boys. So their telomeres, which are these cells that reproduce DNA, they become frayed, so they become more prone to faulty cell reproduction. So that's associated with things going wrong in your body, early death, and men tend to die earlier than women. Men are much more prone to addiction. They account for most homelessness. I can't remember the exact figure. I think it's 80%. Most suicide, 75%. Less likely to ask for help. But the interesting thing is there isn't any help on the whole. I mean, there's more and more, but there isn't any statutory help. So there's shelters for women who've experienced domestic violence and domestic abuse, but very, very few for men. And the statistics are very clear that there's loads and loads of men suffering from intimate partner violence and domestic violence. The statistics on that are pretty clear. I mean, they're debated, but I saw a statistic from the CDC in the US, which is a government body, a Center for Disease Control. So it was a number for US people in the US who suffer violence, who suffer any kind of domestic violence, and it was 52 million. And this is in 2016 to 2017. It was 52 million females versus 50 million males. And there's about 200 international studies that have come up with similar types of figures. But at the low end, it would seem that actual violence is, domestic violence is, there's less men on the receiving end of violence from women, but if taken more broadly, all types of intimate partner violence, there's not a lot in it. That doesn't mean that we don't need to worry about women and girls at all. But if you look at the government's its own strategy, it's called Violence Against Women and Girls. Great, but violence against men and boys sits inside that. So there's this kind of Orwellian sleight of hand that what is the message that men and boys are receiving? Well, it's pretty clear. It's that violence against men and boys is less important than violence against women and girls. But males, on the whole, are far more likely to be victims of violence. Walking down the street at night, you're at much more risk if you're male. It may not feel like that to women, but that's the reality. Yeah. What else? Okay, so.
Well, could I ask you on a point of, do you believe there's an issue? I mean, you touched on it a bit about certain things that men do. Do you believe there's a problem that masculinity is never being portrayed in a positive light? So things men do, like go to war or do these, laborious jobs, or doing things that women wouldn't want to do, and that's never being made into a positive thing. Instead, it's only when they rape someone or if they kill someone being spoken about.
That's a great point. So yeah, you're exactly right. So if a man, the Sarah Everard case, poor woman was murdered on Clapham Common, I think. So that her murderer was male, so that's extrapolated to all males, and all males are potential rapists and murderers now, according to the media. But yeah, like you said, how do houses get built? How do the gas pipes get put in? How did the oil rigs function and get repaired? If you go into a shop, how did all the food get in that shop? Every single day and night, delivery truck drivers are working. They're doing really horrible jobs, rubbish collection with like pointy bits of sharp glass cutting them and poisonous stuff coming out. And this is the patriarchy. The patriarchy actually is what we. It's such a. The way it's used is used as in a pejorative way, as though it's this tyrannical system that we live in. But just because people keep saying that doesn't make it true. So, what evidence is there that we're living in a tyrannical system that prioritizes men and discriminates against women? Well, 94% of workplace deaths are male. Males have almost no reproductive rights. So if you're a man and your partner gets pregnant and decides to have a termination, there's nothing stopping her doing that. On the other hand, if she decides to have the baby and you want a termination, there's nothing you can do either. If you fast forward and you separate, if you're lucky enough to be on the birth certificate, and you might not be, because you're not automatically put on the birth certificate, so there's nothing stopping your partner going to get the birth certificate sorted out without telling you, and then there's nothing you can do. But if you are on the birth certificate, it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, technically it does mean something, but in reality, your child by law has a right to see both parents, but if your partner decides that the child is not going to see you, you're in for a very, very difficult time. It's very, very difficult to get anywhere in family court. It's not impossible, but all the data that I've seen from places like, there's a part of Spain, I think there's a part of there's Kentucky, there is one of the Scandinavian countries, not loads of places, but quite a few places are starting to do 50-50 custody as a sort of starting point. And what you find in that data is that allegations of domestic abuse go down because there's less incentive to have an adversarial slanging match over who's right and who's wrong, who's a bad parent. So that's all skewed in the UK and the US and other countries. Yeah. So what you alluded to is how is masculinity talked about? So how do boys hear about masculinity? Well, it's pejorative on the whole. It's seen as a liability, and I think many people are starting to realise more and more that boys actually do need something to live up to, rather than just to be picked at and told that you don't want to do this, you don't want to do that, you don't want to become a rapist, you don't want to become an abusive man. And if I've seen posters up around Leicester that seem to communicate that if you're a man, you might be abusive, so you need to remember not to be abusive. It's sort of like a really insidious message, I think. We don't put signs up sort of asking everyone to not break other laws, but for some reason men need reminding not to break laws. It's illegal to commit a crime like sexual harassment, for example.
Yeah.
Why do men need reminding of that? Like, women commit sexual harassment as well. I don't think they need reminding not to do that.
Yeah. Does it feel like now you can say anything to a man? I don't know why that is, because of the past or whatever, but it feels like there's almost no boundaries in terms of things that you can tell a man not to do, almost as like a punishment for the past.
Yeah, so I guess it's sort of akin to Diane Abbott talking about why, you know, in the House of Commons the other day, why we need even more apologies about the slave trade, which the UK did, you know, more than anyone else to stop at considerable cost, and but it's never enough, is it? So it sort of generates this. It doesn't produce anything good anymore. It's all just retrospective stuff. So yeah, it's not as if women haven't suffered at the hands of men. That's not. I don't think anyone's making that case. I think the point is we're bringing more children into the world all the time. Half of those children are boys, and the other half are girls, and they need to have a healthy relationship with each other. So what are we actually doing if we're poisoning the well? You know, there's this this organisation called the Global Boyhood Initiative, and it's in partnership with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle and their charity. And this organisation made a report, and it's called The State of UK Boys in 2022. And the report actually says that boys need to change. Boys are responsible. Boys are in the way of women and girls enjoying more equality. So apparently women and girls haven't enjoyed enough equality yet. I don't know what that's based on, because I mean we've never lived in a more equitable society. In fact, it's gone so far the other way that it's ridiculous. Like some of those stats I told you about earlier, but putting that to one side, the problem here is that they've identified boys as the problem, and they think that it's possible to fix that by reprogramming masculinity. So there's no evidence that that's possible, even if it was a good idea. So what's that going to do to boys, you know, and young men?
Yeah.
It's basically picking. It's a very confusing document because it's like it's radical intersectionality. So it's quite contradictory. It's sort of saying, on the one hand, the problem is masculinity, and masculinity can be reprogrammed by this intervention. So they've already started going into London schools doing this pilot, and they want to take it national. And there's a cottage industry of other organisations doing this as well. So some of them are actually quite good. Like this is a guy called Chris Hemmings, who I've interviewed, who's told me about what he's doing, and he's doing it in a more holistic way, and saying, yeah, there is a crisis in masculinity, and boys need to have some kind of workshop around this. But his workshop is it sounds like, from what everything he said to me, sounds like quite a helpful, sort of healthy conversation to have. But the one from the Global Boyhood Initiative, from what I got from it, is that boys need to change to make other people feel better, not to make themselves feel better. So boys aren't, they're not deserving of empathy or care or support in their own right. They're an object of that can be sort of manipulated to generate a socially engineered outcome that's politically motivated. So this is all ideological. It's not based on the integrity and the well-being of the individual boys. And it's amazing that kind of thing can just sort of be apparently go fairly unchallenged. I mean, there's been a few articles written about it in the press. I think one MP has challenged it, which is good. But you know, this is intersectional sort of cultural Marxism stuff that isn't really about anything other than deconstructing. It's postmodern deconstruction. So it's saying that boys aren't boys, they're just people who produce sperm. Girls aren't girls, they're just people who produce eggs. There's no such thing as a father or mother or a son or a daughter. And so if you think about just this in terms of child welfare, what does a child need to develop? Well, they need stability, and they need consistency and predictability. Otherwise they can't develop because they're so unstable. They need their environment to hold them like a container. They need clear boundaries, they need discipline, structure, consistency. If you start taking away all the pieces that produce the solid ground, like you're a boy,
yeah.
You're not just an individual who might have different ways of expressing masculinity, and you might be a little bit of a girl as well. You know, like, that's okay. If you want to have that exploration when you're in your 20s or something, that's fine. But how does that serve a child? So I recognise this is all. It's quite hard for me to to stay to not go off on these tangents. But if we bring it back to the welfare of boys and young men, you know, around your age, there's this concerted, coordinated picking away at what they are and what they should be and what's wrong with them.
Yeah.
So that's just not a healthy. It's not an easy environment to develop in a healthy way for any individual. Doesn't matter who you are. So why can't it just be more positive? Why can't we start talking about the positive aspects of masculinity and what a good father looks like, what a good leader looks like? It just feels very negative, and I think that's kind of that's what we're talking about when we say the masculinity crisis. It's that it's something is lacking, something is desperately needed. And,
I think as a young man, and we've just touched on it there, and I'll just go and grab my charger actually quickly after I ask you this, so bear with. But I think one of my biggest problems I've had, and I'm sure a lot of people listening will be, is the mixed messages. And I know that's quite broad, but in terms of, it doesn't feel like young men can be men anymore. And it definitely feels like it's a negative thing that needs to be like restrained, and we need to be told off for it. But I think at the same time as that, what can often be very beneficial to a man to becoming who they want to be, either in the workplace or in a relationship with a woman or whatever, is being quite masculine and is showing all of those positive traits. Yet at the same time, through schools, or I think especially nowadays, I mean, I can't actually imagine how it would be if I had to go back to school now and see how it is now. I mean, at university, I'm able to stay quite away from it, actually.
What's it like being at uni these days?
Yeah, well, I think uni is different because you don't have like the assemblies, for example. You know, we're not going to be gathered together and told, stay away from being super masculine, right? So thankfully I can just go into my classes and come back and sort of have my own views. But of course, you know, I think just being around the university, really, you can see the sort of way the world is going. And we'll probably touch a few more of those topics in future episodes. But I guess the whole mixed message as a whole is something that I've struggled with a lot, and I think it's created an awful lot of scared men. It's created these incels, if you like, and I think it's a huge reason as to why we're seeing now a masculinity crisis. It's probably a huge reason why we're seeing young men latch to people like Andrew Tate, the extreme examples of it. And I think it's why we're seeing this whole debate sprung up constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the Andrew Tate phenomenon is a product of... Oh, I've lost you. Is a product of this denigration and disdain for men and masculinity. Because if you slag men and boys off for long enough, then they're human. They're going to need something. You can't just harass and bully someone forever and expect nothing to happen. So they're going to look for some nourishment or something that chimes with them. And some of the stuff Andrew Tate says is they're desperate to hear. In the same way that Jordan Peterson he's resonated with so many young men across the world. His message is more nuanced and, I guess, academic or philosophical or semantic. Whereas I think Andrew Tate's he's embodying something, which is the badass man who pulls the fittest woman and wins the fight and makes all the money. And he says, stupid things like, I make all the money, I get all the women, or whatever it is. And it's like, what do people expect to happen? We're not, young men and boys aren't being given the mentoring and the guidance that they need. They've just had things taken away from them. Young teenage boys really need it. They need initiation. So this is a cultural practice that's been going on in all cultures, but has stopped in developed countries quite a while ago. But it's this idea of moving from a state of irresponsibility to responsibility, and there's an instinct and an impulse in a teenage boy that wants to demonstrate that he can take risks and be brave. And it's going to go somewhere. If it's not channeled, it doesn't just disappear. It's gonna show up in, like you said, the incels. So it's really tragic. I've worked with some of these guys. They get agoraphobic. They're just gaming all night. Their circadian rhythms fucked, and they become really unhealthy and addicted to porn. Often that goes hand in hand. And those online communities, those ecosystems of gamers are really unhealthy. So there's a lot of really negative type conversations going on in there. So they're not lifting each other up. It's a little bit like I was going to say Lord of the Rings. What's that story when all the kids are left alone to it's gone out of my head. It'll come back. But what used to, I'm a bit wary of romanticizing this imagined past where we were just living in simpler times and pre-industrial times, because I don't think that's helpful either. But what I know from seeing it actually happen with the charity of Band of Brothers is if you give a young man enough older men to support and be interested in them and to mentor them and to model doing my best as a man and being fallible, they can change. They can turn their lives around really quickly. But if you just denigrate them and let them remain isolated, and you promote this idea that there's something inherently misogynistic and hostile about masculinity. Like masculinity itself is a deviant mental health condition, which was essentially what was that was actually part of the American Psychological Association's guidelines for working with men in 2019. So there's some good stuff in there, but guidelines 1 and 3 just they did say, yeah, there's a patriarchy and masculinity is harmful to your mental health. Traditional masculinity.
Yeah.
So, and it seems like most mainstream educational establishments have swallowed that and are still running with it. So what we're missing, what the boys are missing, is that there is something good and healthy about this drive, these masculine archetypes to fight and win. It's what you see on the sport fields, isn't it? And maybe in the playgrounds when there's a few fights, you know. Are we actually saying that should never happen? Violence is bad, but this masculine aggression, are we seriously saying that that needs to be gone? Because civilization relies on masculine aggression to get shit done. Like, who is going to do all the shit that needs doing without that force? I don't know. I don't think people really understand it. I don't think they really think about. If you just go out for a walk, everything you see, like if you're walking across a field, like farming land, some bloke has driven a tractor to plant all that, and then they've reaped it all, and then it's been transported and packaged. Someone's serviced the tractor, someone's designed the tractor, someone's fixed the broken building, or the farm. It's just, these are aspirational qualities. So I think when I was growing up, I was born in 83. I do remember feeling excited about the idea of these masculine qualities, these sort of heroic qualities. But I don't know. I actually don't know in the culture how often they're conveyed to children anymore. If there's a male character in a film or a cartoon or something, that there isn't any. I can't think, because I do watch a bit of Netflix with my 5-year-old son. There isn't a kind of often a straightforward character that's just modelling that, and there's no ambiguity. There's often a kind of irony now, and if you look at adverts, so the person that's like the idiot is usually the man, and the clever person who made the clever decision to get the product is often a woman. So there's all these messages just like subtly undermining what men and boys are supposed to be. And yeah.
Zach, I'm conscious of time, and I'm aware we didn't want these to go on for too long with episodes coming up, but I mean, would you have a sort of a final message to anyone listening to, and then also just to wrap up really on the first episode?
So yeah, as this is an introductory episode, I would my offer is, if you're not aware of the state of play, the reality, two places that would be really good for you to have a quick look at. One is the Ecologist website, run by my friend Mike Bell, Ecologist, and he runs the all-party parliamentary group for men and boys, and there's some there's some great statistics on that website. And the other one is the Tin Men, which is on its Instagram account. And just have a look at some of those Instagram posts. They're really well produced by a guy called George. And yeah, like, this isn't a matter of opinion. So I think it's just really worth getting your head around what is actually going on. I've forgotten to talk about like loads of aspects of it. One is circumcision. You know, I'm circumcised. I hadn't really thought about it till a few years ago, and then I was at a conference, and they played a video on it, and it was really traumatizing. And so this is going on all the time. You know, male circumcision's legal still in this country, and it's cutting off part of a baby boy's genitals with serious risk of infection and problems with sexual function, but also psychological and problems, and, you know, relationship problems down the line. That's just popped into my head, but there's so many issues here that are just blatantly discriminatory. So yeah, my intention, I realise I'm going on and we need to stop, but yeah, my intention for this first episode is just for people that might not be aware of these issues, just to have a look at the data. It's not, don't take my word for it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, we will be back in a fortnight's time, roughly, I believe.
Yeah.
I will be touching on more topics. So, yeah, Zac, if you want to sign off, I mean, thank you to anyone who watched or listened or who will tune in the future. And yeah, we hope it can give value to men.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pablo. I've enjoyed this and looking forward to next time. Adios.
Brilliant. Thank you all. Take care.